back to another episode of the Dr. Perkins Podcast. Today we're going to be talking about the formation of urine. So, urine, in order to form this, you have three big processes. You have filtration, reabsorption, and secretion. So, filtration, think of like a coffee filter right here. And so what's happening? Well, I'm putting liquid in and it's going through this filter. Now there's a bunch of stuff that's sitting in here that's not coming on through. So for example, all the grounds are not making its way through that filter. And so one of the things is here's our filter right here. And so we got the afferent arterioles taking blood into the kidneys, and then we got the efferent arteriole, which is taking blood out of the kidneys. And so right now the kidneys are getting about 20% of all the blood that's being pumped out from the heart. And so of all the blood the kidneys see, about 20% of that is able to make it through this filter right here. Alright, and these podocytes are going to be important for creating that filter. Now that's going to be about 4% of all the blood pumped by your heart is ending up over here. Alright, so it really is quite crazy what all that those kidneys do. So, given how important this filtration is, it's very important that we regulate it, right? We don't want too much filtration, but we don't want too little. And so, this graph right here, you can see the blood pressure over here, and over here, you can see the GFR. Alright, and so what's going to happen is on this part of the curve right here, what's happening? As we increase the blood pressure, our GFR is going up, right? And so when your blood pressure is below 80, we're trying as hard as we desperately can to bump up that GFR. Why? We don't have enough filtration. And so what were we going to do to make up for this? Well, there's nothing we can do other than hope that the heart pumps more blood, right? So as the heart pumps more blood and that blood pressure bumps up, we're going to make more and more pee, right? So now that we're making enough pee for us to stay alive, I don't need to make more pee as my blood pressure goes up. And so what's going to happen? Well, my blood vessel here is going to start to constrict. It's going to get smaller, smaller, smaller. And so what's going to happen? Even though my blood pressure has gone up, and dramatically so, right? It went from an 80 to now it's 180. My GFR really isn't changing at all. Why? Because I've decreased my blood vessel size, right? And so my kidneys aren't seeing all that extra blood pressure just yet. Now what happens once my blood pressure gets past 180? Well, my blood vessel's as small as it's going to go. And so as my blood pressure goes up, my GFR is going to have to increase because I can't make that blood vessel any smaller. And so this GFR, this autoregulation, is a huge role in your day in, day out GFR management. The next way your GFR is regulated is through the nervous system right here. And so your sympathetic nervous system. So fight and flight, right? And so what's happening is you're getting ready to beat somebody up or run away real fast. Last thing you want is all this blood flowing into my kidneys. I got high blood pressure now. I'm trying to lift up something heavy. And now I'm peeing out all that fluid, and now my blood pressure goes back to normal, and now I can't lift up that heavy thing that I need in order to save my life. Or now some bad guy's going to catch me and beat me up. So how do I stop that from happening? Well, my nervous system is going to stimulate this right here. Hey, look, we're working really hard here, and so we're going to clamp down these arteries here. And so now I'm not getting the blood pressure and the blood flow into the kidney like I used to. And so that's going to help me keep my blood pressure high when I'm exercising. Okay, the other thing that we run into is the parasympathetic nervous system. This is the rest and digest, right? Nobody's out to get you, life is fine, right? And so what are we going to do? Is we're going to relax these arteries right here, right? And so we're going to vasodilate. We're going to open up these arteries right in here. And now we're getting more blood flow through this thing. We're going to actually increase our GFR. And so both your sympathetic and parasympathetic are going to have a role in this. Your sympathetic is going to increase your GFR. It's going to decrease your GFR. And your parasympathetic is going to increase it. Another way we regulate this filtration is through hormones, the endocrine system. So we got lots and lots of hormones that work on here right here. Alright, and so vasopressin selectively constricts the efferent arteriole. So what's happening? Blood flows in, but guess what? Through the afferent, but it also flows out through the efferent, right? So if I got 150 milliliters in, and I got 140 milliliters out, well, guess what? I got 10 out over here. But if I have 150 in and only 40 out over here, then that means I have 110 coming out over here, right? So what goes in through the afferent is either going to come out through the efferent or through the proximal tubule. And so the more I got going out through the efferent, the less I got going out through that proximal tubule. So if I'm crunching down on this efferent arteriole, then that means I got more coming out through this proximal tubule right there. And so yeah, vasopressin, because it crunches down here, we got more GFR. We got more urine being made. Alright, angiotensin 2. Alright, so it's going to constrict the afferent and efferent arteriole, but it's going to crunch down the afferent arteriole more than the efferent. Well, if I got less going in than what I did before, then that means I'm going to have less urine being made, right? Yes, we are crunching down the efferent arteriole, but if I went from 150 to 100, and right here, I only went from, let's say, 60 to 50, no, the amount of urine we're producing is going to be a lot less, because we got so much less coming in through this afferent arteriole. Alright, epinephrine is going to decrease both the afferent and efferent arterioles, but the afferent more, so it's going to decrease the GFR. Norepi, same story. Afferent and efferent arterioles both affected, but the afferent's affected more, so the GFR is going to be decreased. Alright, aldosterone. So aldosterone is going to dilate the afferent arterioles. So if I do nothing else, I'd expect more urine to be made, right? So a higher GFR. But then it also constricts the efferent arteriole. Well, once again, if I did nothing but constrict, I shut down this efferent arteriole over here, I would expect more urine. Well, I'm doing both. I'm opening up the afferent and I'm closing down the efferent. So I'm going to be producing a lot more pee. And so aldosterone is definitely going to increase the amount of pee right here. Alright, AMP and BMP, so atrial natriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide. These are made by the heart when we have too much fluid in our circulatory system. And they're going to dilate the afferent arteriole and constrict the efferent arteriole. And so, no surprise, we're going to produce more pee, which is exactly what you'd want to have happen if you have heart failure. So another factor that controls this filtration is blood pressure and osmosis. So we talked a little bit about this with, that autoregulation, right? We're controlling how much blood flow is through here, right? So it's controlling the glomerular hydrostatic blood pressure, or hydrostatic pressure, right? What your blood pressure is. But one of the things you have is you have osmosis. And so what's happening is the blood has stuff in here that cannot make it past this filter right here. So you're losing lots of water, lots of salt, sugar, amino acids, and so on. But what's being left in here? The albumin, right? The proteins, the red blood cells, white blood cells, platelets, and all that stuff's going to want to suck water back into this system right here. And so the other thing that you got is the filter is going to take a little bit of force, extra force to get through that filter. And so between the filter, the proteins and so on in that filter, the proteins and so on in our blood, what's going to happen is we're only going to have about a 10 millimeter of mercury force pushing the fluid out of here right there. And that 10 mmHg, that's the units of your blood pressure. So if you put a blood pressure upon your arm and pump it up to 10, that's the level of force that we're using to make our pee, right? So not much there. But if you had somebody that was malnourished and they had less albumin in their blood, they had less protein in their blood, they had anemic, right? This number is going to be lower, and so what's going to happen? We're actually going to form more pee even at lower blood pressures. So reabsorption. Well, there's a lot of stuff that you put in the pee that you don't want in the pee. And so what we're going to do is we're going to do reabsorption. And you want to think of a sponge. Oh, not that sponge. Well, maybe that sponge. But reabsorption. And so we're sucking the stuff that we don't want in the pee out of the pee. So the next process that we got is secretion. And so what is secretion? Think of the body as pumping things into the pee, right? So look, I don't want all this urea, uric acid, creatine, drugs, acid, ammonia in my system. So I'm going to pump this into my pee because we didn't filter enough of this stuff out of my blood. Remember, only about 20% of your blood gets filtered when it goes to the kidneys. And so what are we going to do? We're going to take that extra 80% of the blood that didn't get filtered, and we're going to pump the urea and uric acid and creatine and acid particles from that remaining blood into my pee right here. Same idea over here, right? Even potassium, I'm pumping it into my pee. So the next couple of slides, I'm going to be talking about how the body regulates how much of a particular substance is in the blood. And so how the body is going to do that is by regulating the reabsorption and secretion of that substance. So on this slide, we're going to be talking about sodium. So how does the body regulate sodium? So remember, at baseline, we have filtration. And so about 20% of all the sodium in the blood is going to be ending up in the pee, and that's going to be called ultrafiltrate at that point in time. So what's going to happen is if you're in a life or death situation, your sympathetic nervous system is going to kick in, and that's going to increase the reabsorption of salt, of that sodium in particular. Angiotensin 2 is also going to work on the proximal convoluted tubule, and it's going to help us suck up more sodium out of the pee using the sodium hydrogen antiporter. Aldosterone is going to work on the epithelium sodium channels in the collecting ducts to help us suck sodium out of what will eventually become the pee. Now, one of the big things is atrionatriuretic peptide and brain natriuretic peptide. They're going to work indirectly, and so they do not affect the kidney directly. What they do is they decrease how much aldosterone and angiotensin that we have, and once again, those are directly going to increase how much sodium we reabsorb. How do you regulate the secretion of sodium? You don't. The thing is we're worried about reabsorption of sodium, right? So we're already getting tons of sodium into the pee by filtration, right? Put it to you this way. You're peeing out 4% of all the sodium in your blood every minute if you don't lift a finger, right? And so as long as you don't lift a finger, you're peeing out 4% of all the sodium in your blood. It's not going to take long to get that sodium down to whatever level that you need it to be, right? Because your body cannot readily make more sodium. You have to get it from your diet. And so if your sodium's out of control, not an issue, just wait a little bit. You'll get it under control real fast by peeing it out. potassium. How do we regulate the reabsorption of potassium? So, as you see, this is a pretty reactive element. And so, one of the big things is we really don't affect the baseline level of reabsorption right here. What gets affected is the level of secretion. Okay, so how do we regulate the secretion of potassium? Well, angiotensin 2 creates aldosterone, and this is going to activate the sodium-potassium ATPase. So we're going to pump out 2 potassium for every 3 sodium we drag in here. So that's going to lower the potassium, but raise the sodium level in the blood. Now, cortisol is going to work in those same receptors with the same outcome. Now, what about estrogen and progesterone? Well, estrogen and progesterone prevent angiotensin 2 formation, and as a result, no aldosterone, and so you're not going to activate that sodium-potassium ATPase. Now, there is some debate that progesterone might actually activate a potassium pump that would actually reabsorb potassium. But estrogen and progesterone are going to increase the potassium level in the blood. What about magnesium? The level of reabsorption of magnesium isn't really based off your hormones. It's based off the level of magnesium in your blood. And so when the level goes up, we don't reabsorb as much. When the level of magnesium goes down, we don't reabsorb as much, right? There are some hormones that play minor roles: parathyroid hormone, antidiuretic hormone, glucagon, calcitonin, but really not a big role right here. Estrogen plays a big role. It increases the reabsorption of magnesium. What about secretion of magnesium? Well, like most minerals, we really don't have to worry about secretion. Why? Because if I don't do a thing, 4% of all the magnesium in my blood is going to appear in my urine every single minute, right? Put another way as well, is I can have a magnesium level 100 times higher in my pee than in my blood. And that's without any sort of secretion whatever, right? That's just, I filter the blood, I make ultrafiltrate that looks just like my blood, but I reabsorb all this water without reabsorbing the magnesium. So really, secretion isn't that big of a deal for most things. Right, what about the regulation of the reabsorption of calcium? Okay, so parathyroid hormone, one of the things is saying, hey, look, the calcium level in your blood is too low, right? When I talk to people about the endocrine system, I say, hey, pretend it's the body's news network. And so it's saying, whoop, this just in, calcium too low, right? Well, if your calcium's too low, we're going to suck it out, right? And so we're trying to increase the calcium level in the blood, right? Well, I don't want to be breaking down my bones and just peeing out lots and lots of calcium. That's kind of crazy. So I'm going to hold on to as much calcium as I can from the pee so I don't have to break down as much bone, right? The other thing that's going to happen is I'm going to activate vitamin D as well. And so that vitamin D is going to tell me, hey, look, you need to hold on to calcium from your pee. Why? Because one of the things vitamin D does is it helps the intestines absorb more calcium and phosphorus from the diet. There's no point in me absorbing more calcium just to pee it out. Now, some interesting notes about the regulation of calcium reabsorption is acidosis. So when your blood is acidic, you actually pee out a lot more calcium. And they're thinking what's going on with that is you have proteins that are pumping the calcium from your pee back to your blood. Well, if your pee is really acidic, the proteins aren't going to work as good, and so they're going to have a harder time sucking that calcium from my pee and putting it back into my blood. Now, what happens if your blood is basic? Well, one of the big things is it seems like those pumps just work a little bit better. And so for whatever reason, they're better at pumping up that calcium out of the pee. Now, calcitonin, right? That's hormone is telling the body, whoop, this just in, calcium too high, right? If you don't want all that calcium in the blood, well, where are you going to put it at? Well, you have two sources, two places. You can put it in your bones, or you can put it in the toilet, right? You can pee it out. The bones are going to take a while to build up. You can pee it out pretty fast. And so calcitonin not only does it make the bones harder, but it's going to prevent or decrease the amount of calcium you suck out of the pee. And so you're going to not reabsorb as much calcium from the ultrafiltrate. And so more of that calcium will end up in the urine. Now what about the secretion of calcium? From what I could tell, we don't actively secrete calcium. For one thing, we want to maintain a bone density. Right here, a lot of people end up developing osteoporosis. But the other thing as well is, once again, if you wanted to get rid of something from the body, secretion really isn't as important as what you think, right? The only thing you have to do is you have to filter, but not reabsorb, right? And you'd get rid of 4% of all that substance in the blood every single minute. It would drop like a rock. So, regulation of the reabsorption of phosphorus. So, like most minerals, we do not secrete phosphorus. We just fail to reabsorb it when the phosphorus level is too high, or when we want to lower the phosphorus level. So when do we want to lower the level of phosphorus? So we release a hormone called the parathyroid hormone. And so this is telling us, whoop, this just in, calcium too low. So what do we need to do? We need to break down the bones. Well, what are our bones made up of? Calcium and phosphate. So if we're breaking down the bones, we're going to raise that phosphorus level up, right? And so one of the things is we don't want all that phosphorus in our blood, especially when we have a higher level of calcium in our blood, right? So look at our bones. Our bones are rocks made up of calcium and phosphate, right? Why? Because we have so much calcium and phosphorus present at the same time, they actually make a rock. And so that's going to happen when you get a calcium phosphate product of 55 milligrams squared over deciliters squared, right? So what the heck is that? So if my calcium level is 11 and my phosphorus level is a 5 milligrams per deciliter, when you multiply those two together, you're going to get a number of 55 milligrams squared over deciliter squared. At that level, you're actually going to start forming rocks, just like your bones, inside of your arteries, inside your veins, inside your tissues, right? We don't want that happening. And so when the body tries to raise that calcium level in the blood, we gotta lower the phosphorus level in the blood because we don't want to form rocks. And so that's exactly what the parathyroid hormone is going to do. It's going to drop that phosphate level by stimulating the kidneys not to reabsorb phosphorus right there. So very, very important process there. Now this can also be stimulated when the phosphorus level is too high. One of the things that can happen is you get something called renal rickets. And so your kidneys should be peeing out phosphorus, keeping the levels about where they need to be. But when your kidneys start growing bad, the phosphorus level goes too high. And so your parathyroid gland produces lots and lots of parathyroid hormone, telling the kidneys, hey, you gotta get to work. You gotta stop reabsorbing all this phosphorus. And so it only makes the situation worse because we're starting to break down the bones to release the calcium and phosphorus. We're telling the kidneys to produce vitamin D to help us absorb more calcium and phosphorus from the gut. And so unfortunately, people can have very brittle bones when phosphorus is not being properly regulated in the blood because of kidney failure. Okay, so the regulation of the reabsorption of acid and base and secretion of acid and base. So one of the big things is the kidneys regulate your acid and base level by secreting acids and reabsorbing bases. Now, another thing they use is they create buffers in your pee, and so the pH of your pee doesn't change as much as what it should. And so it's very hard to get a pH of less than 4.5 in your urine. And the reason being is because of these buffers. And so you can get a total amount of acid level in your pee about 2,500 times greater than what is in your blood because of those buffers. So really kind of a big deal there. Now, we have a degree of ability to just secrete bicarb, but that's not as big of a deal. So let's kind of talk about how we regulate things. So when your sympathetic nervous system is kicked in, you're reabsorbing bicarb. Now that makes sense to me because if you're running away or trying to beat somebody up, right, a lot of times you're using lactic acid metabolism. And so you're producing a lot of acid because you're not able to get enough blood flow to your muscles to be able to do it aerobically. So how do we prevent your blood from becoming too acidic? We hold on to as much base as we can. Alright, another thing we do is ADH. So ADH stimulates you to pee out acid. We directly pump the acid from our blood into our pee. It also stimulates bicarbonate reabsorption. Parathyroid hormone limits how much bicarbonate you're going to reabsorb. And then hypotonic solutions themselves will actually stimulate the kidneys to reabsorb more bicarbonate. So if you're dehydrated, you're going to be holding on to more base. So how do we regulate water absorption? Most of the time when people talk about this, they talk about salt, right? And so we're regulating how much salt we're holding on to. And so because we're making the blood more concentrated than the pee, we're going to suck more water out of the pee into the blood. Yes, but if we were to talk about water directly, the way we regulate reabsorption of water directly is through angiotensin II. And so one of the things angiotensin II does is it stimulates the brain to produce antidiuretic hormone and aldosterone, the no-pee hormones, right? And so these are going to increase water reabsorption. Now, antidiuretic hormone works directly on the kidney by increasing what's called aquaporphins, or water channels. And so the water is going to be reabsorbed from the pee. Aldosterone is going to be that mechanism they love to talk about, where we're going to pump the salt in from the pee into the blood or into the tissues of the kidneys. And so that's going to draw the water out of what becomes pee. That is how aldosterone works. Okay, so let's talk about the regulation of everything else. So I could spend hours researching and describing all these other things that will end up in our pee, such as uric acid, our oxalate, and so on. But, I'm going to spare you guys, and we'll just talk about these other things, such as amino acids, oligoproteins, vitamins, and glucose. For these things, pretty much we're going to suck as fast as we can and suck these things out of the pee. We shouldn't really be seeing any amino acids or oligoproteins. Well, what the heck is an oligoprotein? Okay, so an oligoprotein is going to be a short protein. It only has a few amino acids long. Okay, and then our vitamins and glucose. Once again, we're going to be absorbing these things pretty much as fast as we can. There's going to be some exceptions to the vitamins, particularly your water-soluble vitamins, but that's another topic for another day. Alright, that concludes today's episode. If you liked what you heard, be sure to click the subscribe and like button down below. And as always, if you have any questions, comments, concerns, or if there's any particular topic you'd like me to create a video on, let me know in the comments down below. Alright, well, I look forward to seeing you on my next podcast.